I was directed to another video talking about how stupid evolution is. Perhaps this one will convince me I'm wrong in accepting it. Let's check it out.
So I recently watched a documentary on YouTube that was all about the, quote, evolution of digital data storage media.
Just to start, it's important to understand what evolution means. It just means a change or development in something. The colloquialism is that when saying evolution, people tend to think of biological change via natural selection. Even I fall into that trap. Hopefully it's understood in my videos through context. When I say evolution, such as in this video, I'm talking about biological evolution. But technically, it simply means any kind of change. My political views have evolved over time. The tools we use to survive have evolved. Even the process to make those tools has evolved. So, when people say that data storage has evolved, there's no need to do air quotes. Data storage really has changed over time.
And while the documentary itself was fascinating, there was one large aspect of the documentary that just left me feeling sick inside. Just left a nasty, bitter flavor in my mouth. And that aspect was all about the sheer stupidity. Yes, stupidity. The complete and total blindness and the willful ignorance of evolutionists. Evolutionists who do not believe in God, who do not believe in a creator, but they put total blind faith in the theory of evolution, believing ultimately that we all and everything in the universe itself, ultimately came from nothing, and that there was no need for a creator.
Wow, less than a minute in and so much to break down. Belief in a deity and acceptance of evolution are not wholly contradictory positions. You can believe that a God exists and that populations change over time. Conversely, you cannot accept the claims of a deity and also not accept evolution as the driving force behind the diversity of life. One of the rock stars of the paleontological community these days is Mary Schweitzer, who discovered both soft tissue in dinosaur fossils and the natural process that can preserve such soft tissue in bones for tens of millions of years. She's also a believing Christian. She accepts both evolution and a deity. While I don't personally, it is possible to hold both views. Second, the theory of evolution says nothing, absolutely nothing, about the formation of the universe. It doesn't even deal with the formation of life. It's simply the best explanation for the diversity of life on the planet. Finally, it's not blind faith that causes people to accept evolution. It's been demonstrated exhaustively that mutations cause organisms to be born slightly different. And if these differences are beneficial to that organism will thrive and be able to pass on those mutations. This, for example, is why we need to get new flu shots every year. The influenza virus can rapidly change, and new strains that are resistant to the current flu shot will be able to thrive and multiply if we don't update our vaccinations.
They put blind faith in this ridiculous theory of evolution, and they reject that plain and simple and obvious truth, that all things in the universe, everything in existence, must have been designed, must have been created, that there must be a grand designer, a grand creator, a God who created all things in heaven and in earth.
But that isn't an obvious truth. Many of the things in the universe can be explained to have formed through natural processes. Stars can form when enough hydrogen gathers together that the gravitational effects will collapse them into the nuclear furnaces we see in the sky. Planets can form when enough dust and gases have been gathered by the gravity of the aforementioned stars that they form the rocky and gaseous planets that make up a solar system. And on a much smaller scale, snowflakes are very complex geometric forms that occur from natural processes as well.
So this documentary that I watched, once again, it was all about the, quote, evolution of digital data storage media.
And again, data storage has evolved over time. I think we can all agree that it's quite different than it was a few centuries ago. So yes, data storage has evolved. Not in the same biological sense as small mutations adding up over time through self-replication, but it has changed.
The documentary first looked at ancient civilizations, namely the Egyptians, and compared their systems for storing information, their media for storing information, to our media systems in the 21st century, and how their system, in many ways, is superior to our own. And you might be thinking, superior to our own? The Egyptians, they lived 4,000 years ago. How is that possible? Well, the Egyptians, they stored all of their information about their people, their language, culture, history on stone. And stone is a wonderful media for storing information. Why? Because it lasts for a very long time. It's estimated that inscriptions made on stone will last up to 10,000 years. The documentary then looked at ink and paper, and how ink and paper is also a wonderful media for storing information, storing knowledge. If it is properly cared for, ink and paper can last up to 2,000 years. So we compare these systems for storing information, these media, to our own media systems in the 21st century. And we realize that we have a problem that we're facing in the 21st century, a very unique problem, a problem that no other people before us ever faced. And our problem is that our media storage devices, everything from what was 30 years ago, we had floppy disks, and then there was CDs, and then DVDs, and then Blu-ray disks, and then we got hard drives and SSDs, solid state drives. All of these digital data storage devices, these media for storing digital information. All of our media storage devices are far too frail to last for more than 40 to 50 years.
If you look at how data storage has changed over the millennia, it actually is a good metaphor for Darwinian evolution. Like biological systems, data storage can... What? Fine. At least I'm getting some use out of my 5th grade English class. Let's back her up. If you look at how data storage has changed over the millennia, it's a good simile for Darwinian evolution. Like biological systems, data storage has gone through changes over time, with more efficient systems thriving over older ones, even at a cost to some functions, so that the older forms of the data storage are now obsolete. While stone tablets do have the permanence of lasting thousands of years, the drawbacks mean that more efficient forms of data storage will thrive. While it won't last nearly as long as stone carvings, our current data storage can hold much more than a piece of stone several thousand times its size. It can also be written to much faster, incorrect or unneeded data can be removed or edited quickly, and it can be copied much easier. You damage a stone tablet, it's going to take a long time to make a replacement.
The Lord Jehovah, has given unto you these 15, 10 commandments for all to obey.
Finally, while carved stone will last longer than most other data storage, it's not really necessary for the needs most of us have. I have no reason for what I record to be kept for more than a few decades, so using a more permanent form of storage is unnecessary for me. These new forms thrived, are accepted and used, while the older, less efficient, and more expensive forms are generally phased out. It's like the eyes of a star-nosed mole. Condylura cristata's ancestors had decent working eyes. As the species went underground to exploit a new biome, it didn't need those eyes anymore, and in fact were a waste of bodily energy to grow and maintain. What it needed was a body that was best adapted to life underground. A mole ancestor who was born with a genetic code that has weaker eyes was actually at an advantage over other underground moles because its body wasn't wasting resources it didn't need to use, and that genetic code with less developed eyes was passed on. Let me put it this way. There are several good reasons that the video I'm responding to is, well, a digital video, and not a treatise carved in stone tablets. Even though it doesn't have the permanence of stone, the benefits modern data storage has outweigh that advantage, like being able to be a video. Well, I guess he could have carved 32 stone tablets for every second, and then have people flip through them really fast, but I don't think it would convey the same impact.
Just to give you an example of how much digital information is actually out there, if you were to store all of the knowledge of the world, all of our knowledge, language, culture, history, everything that we know, store all of it on DVD discs, you would end up having a stack of DVDs that would stretch from the sun to well beyond the planet Mars. That's a lot of DVDs. So this is a very unique problem. And the documentary then looked at a group of scientists and engineers who are working to solve this very unique problem. And this group of scientists and engineers, evolutionists, they are right now looking at DNA, the DNA in all living organisms, but mainly the DNA of human beings, as the solution for this problem.
This is actually a known process called biomimicry. Basically, biomimicry is what we This is actually a known process called biomimicry. Basically, biomimicry is using what we have learned about the natural world as a baseline for our own innovations. The best example is probably flight. To develop fixed-wing aircraft, lift was needed. It was noted that the shape of a bird's wing is such that air flowing over it moves at a different speed than air flowing under it. This was mimicked by humans to build wings which create lift in the same function. The reason that humans will often use biomimicry is that nature will often use the guess and check method of natural selection to, well, select the most efficient forms possible within the limits of minute changes. The upside is that we can look at what works and then design and build wings without going through the arduous step-by-step process for millions of years to go from ancient dinosaur to birds. It's not surprising that DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, is an incredibly efficient data storage process. In many cases, more complex life will be better in a biome than less complex life, although this isn't always the case. As creatures become more complex, it makes sense that how their genome is recorded becomes more complex as well. The precursor to DNA, RNA, ribonucleic acid, can form naturally but is inherently unstable. This means that life could form on its own, but this RNA-based life would not be as stable. A mutation for doubling up the helix, the di in deoxyribonucleic, would be an incredibly advantageous mutation that would quickly be spread throughout the population. And, since this is theorized to have happened about 4 billion years ago, with each generation slightly different, it makes sense that very simple DNA will become incredibly complex over time.
How is it the solution to this problem? Well, DNA, and all of these scientists and engineers fully acknowledge this, DNA is an incredible, absolutely amazing system for storing information, and that it is far superior and much, much more complicated than anything we human beings have ever designed. Designed is the key word there.
Yes, designed is not technically the right word there. Design denotes a planned end process, which is not part of nature. Biological evolution only cares about what is helping an organism survive or breed at the moment, not what may be advantageous in the future. The complexity of the DNA molecule has had billions of years of guess and check to adapt to environments that organisms find themselves in. As biomes change, the organisms within them will either adapt to these changes or go extinct.
I see that, and I see God. I see DNA, and I see designer. It must have been designed, because it carries information. It's not just random chemicals. It carries information. It must have been designed. That's logical. That's obvious.
It may appear obvious that it was designed, but this isn't the case. Just because something is complicated doesn't mean it was designed. It also appears that the sun goes around the earth, and this was believed for a very long time. But we now know that what appears obvious isn't always how things actually work. The vast amount of information found in DNA, and to a lesser extent RNA, came through the long, tedious, but unguided by outside intelligence process of small mutations and natural selection.
But then the documentary, immediately after talking about these scientists and engineers, who once again look at DNA as their blueprint to help them design better systems, the documentary immediately went into an explanation as to how DNA, or it didn't explain how, because no one can explain how. They just say it. They just say that DNA spontaneously came into existence roughly 3 billion years ago at the bottom of the ocean, and that it was not designed. Did you get that? Do you understand that level of stupidity? I don't. I honestly do not understand that level of stupidity. It blows me away how stupid these people can be, how blind they can be, how willfully ignorant they can be.
Your confusion of things like biological evolution does not mean that it isn't true. As I mentioned earlier, DNA did not just spontaneously develop. RNA came first. It was simpler but unstable. DNA evolved from that, being more complex but also more stable, at that point an acceptable trade-off. As I mentioned in the past several times, I didn't accept evolution when I was younger. I had issues with what I misunderstood about the theory, but I looked into what I didn't know and talked to experts and found out where I was wrong. Because I didn't understand something, I tried to find out where my mistakes were. But just because I, as a layman, didn't understand it at the time, didn't mean that the entire theory was wrong.
How the truth can stare at them right in the face and they don't see it. Any one of these engineers and these scientists, any one of them, if you were to ask them if a floppy disk, something as simple, unbelievably simple as a floppy disk, if you were to ask them if a floppy disk could come into existence by itself, every single one of these scientists and engineers would tell you that's preposterous, that's ridiculous, that's absurd. A floppy disk must have been designed. There's no way in the universe a floppy disk, or a CD, or a DVD, or a hard drive, or a SSD, or a computer, there's no way it could come to existence by itself. It must have been designed. That's obvious. And yet these same scientists and same engineers who look at DNA as their blueprint for designing far superior systems of storing information, pretty much every single one of these scientists and engineers would look at DNA and say, yep, that came into existence by itself. Even though they admit it is a far superior and far more complicated system of storing information than anything human beings have designed.
The difference between things like man-made floppy disks and biological organisms is self-replication. Organisms will create copies of themselves. If a mutation causes a change between the parent and the child organism that is beneficial, it will be because of a change in DNA. Over time, this DNA will become more and more complex. If you leave a floppy disk out, it won't make any copies of itself, so there's no natural way it could become more complex. This does lead to an interesting thought experiment. What if we did have a storage device that could self-replicate, making another physical copy of itself, but would randomly change its structure slightly? We could take that and only allow the devices with the largest data storage to continue to breed. And over time, we would lead to generations that would be much more efficient than the devices we started with. Sadly, this is only a thought experiment. Currently, we don't have the ability to breed storage devices. If only that were true.
If I were to see a painting, I don't need to know or see the painter in order to know with absolute certainty, 100% certainty, that there must be a painter. Why? The painting itself demands the existence of a painter, because the painting carries with it knowledge, information. You see the painting and you know it must have been painted. It demands the existence of a painter.
One of the things that separates a painting from an organic being is there is no known natural process that will create a representation of reality on canvas like a painting. Again, If there was some kind of self-replication process where images are mostly duplicated with some slight changes, and the ones that look like a specific scene are kept, eventually we could have a painting without a painter. And we actually do have something like that. Many species of butterfly, over time, have adopted what is known as eye spot mimicry. This is the process where a butterfly will be born with spots on its wings that will make it appear, for example, to be a more dangerous animal. The first butterflies with slight wing spots that, through a random mutation, would look something like eyes would be less likely to be eaten than their brethren with no spots at all, and therefore be more likely to pass on their genes, including those spots. As generations pass, the more similar to a predator the eyes look, the more likely the organism will survive compared to its contemporaries. Over time, such eye spots would look convincingly like a predator found in nature. So, in this way, you could say we have a painting, or at least a visual representation of something, without a painter.
Wherever you find information, you can know with absolute certainty that there must be an intelligence behind the information, someone who designed it.
No. As I've mentioned, natural processes can work to create stable systems, and self-replicating organisms can create more complex organisms over time, producing, as you put it, information without an intelligence.